swept under the rug. There are 4 principal categories in the collection: baptisms, confirmations, deaths, and marriages. And the idea is we want you to be able to go to the site and say, okay, I want to know about all the women baptized in 1598 of African descent with the name Maria. And then you can start to see that material come up. We're also creating sort of a digital virtual archive experience, so you can kind of flip through the pages of the book. You can hover over the words on the page and see the word pop up above it, so you can see the transcription. We have a couple samples of that available now. But you get to see the page while you're also looking at a translation below, which I think is critical for those of us who want to kind of like get to some of those truths, right? In January, we're launching a new version of the site that will enable you to make your own custom charts so that you can start to do that quantitative research. You can chart birth rates, death rates. You can chart migration patterns, when large groups of people arrive, etc.
3 minutes.
Oh no. Okay, here's your surprise. Okay, so these records hold some fantastic material. We want to talk about before 1619. This is the baptismal record of the first recorded person of African descent. First recorded baptism of someone of African descent. 1595, January. You see the name of the person in the margin, and then you see their name next in the entry. It's a problematic name. That's shorthand for Esteban, for sure. But next to Esteban is the word hija. So Esteban is the daughter of some. So we're still figuring that out, but the name is Esteban for sure. He is the child of Gratia, and Gratia is a slave. And she's the slave of someone named Ripped Page Tatalina. So we're working it out, but as we continue to go through these records, it's not outside of the realm of possibilities that we reconstruct this person's story. This is the first marriage record we have between slaves in the very early 1600s. This is more than a decade before Jamestown. Before Jamestown, not before the arrival of the first slaves. And this entry, too, going back to not being able to find the names, you read this entry and it's about a man named Domingo, un negro, and a little girl, a little black girl named Catalina, and her mother Inés. Their names would not have appeared here except for the fact that Domingo and little Catalina contracted the plague in the 16th century. This is an inventory for the treatment the doctor used to treat the plague. But now we have them. We have them in the database. In St. Augustine, I mean, I don't need to say it again, they built St. Augustine. The fort, all the houses, coquina stone was being quarried, 85 years before the beginning of the Castillo de San Marcos. Here is a description of the first hospital ever in the continental United States. Early 1590s, the nurse at this hospital was named Maria, and she was a black woman. So yeah, we're talking about before 1619, but how about changing that narrative that we've got going for the rest of it? I mean, how many of you actually hear about in school that the first Underground Railroad runs south? So we have these marriage records of runaway slaves, and we have so much information about these people. It tells us where they're running from often. So yeah, we know they're coming from the Carolinas, from Georgia, but they're coming from places like New York, Philadelphia, the Philippines. They're coming to Florida in search of freedom. And then not just where they're coming from, but where they're coming from in Africa. I know, in the textbooks in school, when you go through it, it's a narrative of coming from Africa to the plantation and the story is over. There's so much traveling, there's so much familial network that gets constructed. It's not a black and white story. Well, that was appropriate. It's something that's very complex. And there's more to it than I think, what we're kind of giving in the textbooks today. In 1763, Florida was transferred to the British from Spain. So it's the British period, and at that point, they were keeping meticulous records about who was leaving. So you may be familiar with some of these names. The individuals at Fort Mose, that first, free black settlement. But then also, what about all the people in St. Augustine? There were over 300 privately owned slaves in St. Augustine that ended up in Cuba and a few in Campeche. And we can start to take that data and put it onto colonial era maps. So maps are fun again. And you can go to the site, you can hover over properties, and you can ask questions like, show me all of the properties in 1764 St. Augustine that were owned by free blacks. And those are all those fuchsia button. Those like reddish reddish dots are confirmed properties owned by free blacks in St. Augustine in 1764. There are more, but we want to make sure that we wait until we're certain before we confirm that. All those purple ones, those are all properties owned by women. Over a third of the property in St. Augustine in 1764 was owned by women. You don't get that on the trolley tour. And I always get in trouble for this, but I have to ask every time, in that part of St. Augustine today, how many properties do you think are owned by people of African descent?
No.
50%.
So, in closing, finally. So these records, again, they hold amazing information, but also they're changing this narrative that we have. So this is an example. There are things we haven't figured out yet, so I need to share them with you. You have my email address. Please contact me if you figure out what's happening here. The narrative now, the story is that slave status is inherited from the mother. So if the mother was a slave, the child's a slave, and vice versa. There are a few exceptions, and they say usually the exceptions only happen when the father is a very elite white man in society, probably the slave owner, and he doesn't want to fess up. That's the narrative we get. But then we get an entry like this. It's a baptism record for a free mulatto named Joseph. His mother's a slave, but his father is another free mulatto. Not a slave owner, So this is it's not what we're used to, which is exciting. And then the very last one, this one I'm just totally lost on because it's the baptism of a free mulatto named Miguel. We know his birthday, his exact birthday, but his parents are unknown. Both of them. Someone's not telling something. So I'd love to figure that out, but the hope is that, the realities of St. Augustine through this collection start to change the way, start to make us think more broadly about the concept of African American presence in the United States. And I really truly am grateful. It's an honor to be here. And I hope that when we get to 2119, the narrative is fundamentally different.